today's session for TUMI Volt charging station webinar series. This session is being organized under the global project TUMI Volt Urban Mobility from Renewable Energy with support of the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. The topic of today's session is electrifying informal transportation in India, and it is co-presented by the Global Partnership for Informal Transportation and TUMI Volt. My name is Rohan Modi, and I work for TUMI, and I'll be moderating today's session together with Benji from the Global Partnership for Informal Transportation. So before we begin, I would like to give you a heads up on today's house rules for the session. So I'll request all the participants to kindly switch off your microphones and the videos when the speakers are speaking. For maybe any technical difficulties and also even for the questions on on the session, I'll request you all to kindly use the chat box, and we'll get back to you on your questions over the session. After the whole session, we have a dedicated section for FAQs in today's session. And for technical difficulties, my team will get back to you with the best of their abilities. Also, I would like to inform you that today's session is being recorded, and it will be shared on YouTube and TUMI website for further dissemination in a day or two. So I'll start sharing with my screen. Okay, that's weird. I cannot have my screen up. Just a moment, some technical difficulties here. Okay, so my colleague will share her screen. My colleague Lena, she'll be sharing the screen. It's always this last moment technical difficulties. We just checked it and now it's not working. So I'll take this moment to introduce our speakers. So today we have our speakers from. Okay, so I think we have the screen. All right. So today we'll be having our guest speakers from the Global Partnership for Informal Transportation, Mr. Benjamin de Le Pena, who will also be co-moderating the session today with me. He is the CEO of the Shared Mobility Center. He also chairs the Global Partnership for Informal Transportation and is the founder of Agile City Partners. He writes and curates Makeshift Mobility, a fortnightly newsletter which covers innovation in informal transportation. He also serves on the US Advisory Committee of ITDP. Previously, he has served as a Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at the Seattle Department of Transportation, where he and his team drafted the city's transportation infrastructure plan and developed city's new mobility playbook. Very happy to have you here, Benjamin.
Happy to be
Our
here.
second speaker today is Ms. Sonal Shah. She has featured as one of the remarkable women in transport for the year 2020 by TUMI. She is the founder of Urban Catalyst and the Center for Sustainable and Equitable Cities and advises multiple stakeholders like government departments, development banks, philanthropic organizations, and think tanks on the topic of sustainable and equitable cities and sustainable transport. Over the last 15 years, she had worked extensively in India and US and has led numerous projects supported by ADB, DFID, IKI, Gates Foundation, and GIZ. She played a crucial role in introducing India's first gender-sensitive urban planning guidelines and towards revising India's national urban street design guidelines. Sonal holds MSc degree in urban planning from Columbia University and has featured as alumni spotlight in 2013-2014. Very happy to have you here, Sonal. And our third speaker today, Mr. Cedric Tantong, he is the CEO of Three Wheels United. His company is a tech-enhanced asset financer that provides affordable loan and leasing options to to around 175 million light vehicles. So in India, so that's what his company is aiming for. He holds a degree in systems and information management from France and a business management degree. He's passionate about turning ideas that will improve livelihoods of people in the informal economies. He has lived and worked in 4 countries across 3 continents. Previously, he has also founded a company in Cameroon in the e-commerce segment and had worked in a French company who used to transform ideas of interesting laboratory research projects into businesses. So very happy to have you all. And without further ado, I would like to start with our first session. That's a presentation from Global Partnership for Informal Transportation. Mr. Benjamin, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Rohan, and thank you, GIZ and TUMI. Thank you, Lena, and the team over at TUMI for inviting us and helping us put together this conference, and thanks to this webinar. Thank you to Cedric and Sonal, who Cedric is in Hyderabad and Sonal is in Delhi. I'm in Seattle. So I love how these webinars go really international. Of course, we have the whole, is it working? Is it not working? So it's just par for the course. What I'm going to do is give a brief overview of the Global Partnership for Informal Transportation, and then 2 slides about electrification in India. I don't claim to be an expert, which is why about electrification of 3-wheelers in India. That's why we have Cedric and Sonal. So I will leave them to give the details of it, but I will frame it in those terms. And we'll talk about, those of you that I've met in many other conferences, you know that we like to bang the gong on informal transportation and how it's completely ignored. So I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully it'll work for me. And please let me know if my screen is showing. And you should see a blue slide that says the electrifying the transformation of India's informal transportation. Is it on?
Yes, it's on.
Great. I will also ask for one more thing. When I'm presenting on my particular laptop, I cannot see the people on the screen, the people participating. And I've had this where I was going on for 20 minutes with UNDP, and I had lost them for 20 minutes. So every now and then, someone cough or tell me whether you're still see whether I've lost it, right? And if I ask a question, please do respond. All right, let me dive in and tell you first that we're presenting this with a global partnership for informal transportation. These are our links, our social media presence, our newsletter, Pop Transport, which I suggest you subscribe to if you are interested in informal transportation, and our website. Our goal is to work our mission is to work hand in hand with informal urban transportation in the systems of the cities of the Global South, because there's a lot of innovation already happening. I think our two speakers today will attest to that, and they're proof of the innovation that's happening. We want to improve the services, we want to change the business models, and do that by leveraging new technology and new policies. Our real belief is informal networks, like in informal transportation, can confront climate change and make our cities work for everyone. And I like to brag that my two co-founders are both noted women in transportation. Julia Nebrija was named by TUMI as one of the remarkable women in transportation for 2021. So she shares that spotlight with Sonal and the amazing women who work in transportation. And Andrea Sanhil Leon, who is in Costa Rica, was named by IADB as one of the important women working in transportation and climate. So I bask in the glow of their amazingness. Our partners are New Cities Foundation, which is based out of Montreal, and CoMotion, which runs a conference on technology and transportation in LA and Miami. We have strategic partners, World Resources Institute, and the Shared Use Mobility Center, which I chair. Which I'm the CEO of, and we're based in the US, and we're focused on shared uses and the business of shared use. And we have research partners, the CPSU in Costa Rica, Sonal's own Center for Sustainable and Equitable Cities, the Center for Sustainable Urban Development in Columbia University, and Interlink, which is based out of the University City London, UCL, and they're a global network of researchers. We are banging the gong on informal transportation because it is global. And it comes by many names: matatus, trotros, camionetas, colectivos, jeepneys, auto rickshaws, tricicads, minibuses, mega taxis, boda-boda, tuk-tuks, what have you, okadas and ojeks. And they are in 2 or 3 wheels or 4. They can be human-powered or engine-powered. But very likely it moves and employs more people than all the city trains, buses, and taxis around the world. And they dominate the cities of the Global South, provide affordable mobility and middle-class livelihoods for mostly low, and employment for mostly low-income households. The main thing we stress is it's a global phenomena, and yet it always seems to be treated as a local problem. One of the things we're working on now is looking at all the documents on transforming transportation, including electrifying public transportation, to respond to climate change and equity issues. And very rarely is informal transportation actually mentioned as an asset. It's treated as with a problematized frame. But there's good news that's happening. So how global is it? Two-wheelers, I mentioned their names. They're in all continents, right? As motor taxis, also as delivery. Four-wheelers like the jeepney, the songtao, the matatus of Nairobi, the colectivos and the chicken buses and peceros of Latin America. And they're also in the global north. The dollar vans of New York City is informal transportation, barely recognized and regulated the wrong way. Hong Kong has the vanjais. And Eastern Europe and Central Asia have the marshrutkas, which, if you look at their behavior, is actually very, very close to matatus. And then the topic of our conversation, three-wheelers, which is often seen as kind of a South Asia, Southeast Asia phenomenon with, Thailand's tuk-tuks and the auto rickshaws and the chingchis of Pakistan. But it really is global. It's in the Philippines. It's in MENA. There's tuk-tuks in Egypt. in Iran and Iraq. The recent uprising in Iraq for last year was called the tuk-tuk revolution because the informal transportation drivers had a big role in it. We just finished a datathon in Central America, kind of collecting the names and the roots of as many as we can. It was a crowdsourced project, and it's the exact same vehicle, and I wouldn't be surprised if these weren't imported from South Asia, from India. So it's a global phenomena. But let me turn quickly to say what's happening in India, right? This is from 2018, and I couldn't find newer numbers. But so of the 12 to 15 million auto rickshaws, and so now will correct me if I'm wrong on this one. Do I still have you, by the way? You're all still there. Okay. Um, there's about 1.5 million e-rickshaws now, and that number is growing at 11,000 a month. To contextualize that number, that's 3 times the number of electric buses in China, and bigger than the total number of electric cars in China. This is only dwarfed by the number of electric two-wheelers in China, right? So it's huge, huge market, huge growth. And it started also from kind of the way makeshift mobility does. Makeshift, right? People started assembling their own electric engines, and there were these are pictures from New York Times, right? On the top left is homebrew charging that was happening in repair shops. And then some companies came in and started this charging infrastructure that was kind of more traditional. And then from Taiwan and Indonesia and also in India, the new thing is the swappable batteries, right? Which makes it even more convenient and easier to roll out the infrastructure. So that's my 40,000-foot view. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And I hope you all saw that and you're still with me.
Yes.
So that's my 40,000-foot view. I'd love to have Sonal and Cedric on board now, and let's have a conversation. And just a quick question to both of them. How's the weather where you are, and how are you feeling this lunchtime or morning in the context of everything that's going on? Let's start with that easy question. Sonal?
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead. Well, thank you for having me here. Thank you to Benjamin and to TUMI. Very, very glad to be here. Like you mentioned, Benjamin, I'm in Delhi. It's warm, but we are also in a pretty, I think, tense situation with the spike in COVID cases, not only in Delhi, but across cities in India. So that's the context. So at home a lot and trying to kind of see how I can stay fit and healthy otherwise.
And stay sane after a year of the closings.
Yes.
But let's talk about COVID and three-wheelers in a while. Cedric, how is Hyderabad?
Well, I am in Bangalore.
I'm sorry. Look at me. I said Hyderabad. I'm sorry. I apologize. I said that several times.
You said it a couple of times.
Bangalore. Why did I think Hyderabad? Sorry.
It's all good. I joined Sonal to say the COVID situation is worrying, but for me personally, there's a lot going on. So the day doesn't stop, and that's just what it is. Yeah. And yeah, thanks for having me here, and thanks to the team at TUMI as well.
Well, we're very glad to have you both. So let me dive in quickly, and so now I'll throw the first question at you, and tell us about the role of three-wheelers in India's public transportation system. I know it's called officially intermediate public transport, and you and I have had conversations about what is it intermediate to, right? And how critical are they? And particularly in your area of expertise, how important are the three-wheelers, particularly to women and their mobility in the city?
Sure. So yeah, I think I was probably going to say that we've had conversations on how we can talk about informal transport, popular transit, informal public transport, etc. And I guess we will probably right now maybe just use the word paratransit in some ways to encapsulate this this broad form or mode of transport. So I think looking at the context of India, when we see cities over 100,000 population, which are about 468, right? Only 14% of those have access to a formal city bus service. So that's one data point, right? And so in that sense, you also see that a big portion of this unserved demand, if you will, is also met by paratransit. And when we kind of, so I'll draw upon some of our work in Delhi and in the eastern state of Bihar to kind of illustrate examples as well. So when we look at cities and we look at some of the medium and large scale cities as well, you see that a quarter of trips, right, are served by paratransit. In cities, in medium scale cities in East India like Patna, a city of about 1.8 million, 91% of public transport trips are by paratransit. And I think, you know, we spoke about this, whether this is paratransit, this is public transport. And therefore, when you actually go further down to smaller cities, cities around 500,000 or lesser, we see that while paratransit caters to 12 to 18% of all trips, because a big share is actually by walking and cycling, paratransit caters to about 97 to 99% of all public transport trips, because many of these cities don't even have a bus service, right? So in that sense, you know, we are not only talking about them as an intermediate mode of transport, as we've discussed, but as the main mode of public transport. And now kind of coming to women, you know, because our own work is often at the intersection of gender, paratransit, and walking and cycling. All of these modes are, you know, severely undercounted, underrepresented, and a big part of our work is to see how we bring visibility through data. Our own work in some of the small and medium scale cities has shown that women constitute anywhere between 57 to 75% of paratransit trips, right? So they are actually a majority of the users. And I'll just kind of, and in many cases, even in large cities like Delhi, where we recently did a study as late as December, we found that while 19% of poor women's trips were by paratransit, some of their P-card trips, right? A majority of the P-card trips are also served by paratransit. So there's a lot of nuance, but recognizing that, you know, women often are a majority of their passengers as well.
Right, that's amazing numbers, and rarely talked about outside the country, right? This kind of level of service. I'm gonna pivot to ask about the electrification, and that'll allow me to get in the conversation with Cedric. I've read accounts that, you know, like I said in my slide, it started kind of homebrew. Auto rickshaw drivers were converting their rickshaws into electric, and at one point whether it was a state court or the Supreme Court declared them illegal after an accident with a child who fell into a boiling pot of had boiling oil on them. They bumped into it because they were with their mother, who was bumped by one of these electric rickshaws, and then the government turned around and turned it into a program. What was that kind of? That's the anecdotal evidence, but what was the impetus for coming out with these big programs that support electrification?
Sure. I think maybe I'll take a step back again, you know, because the national government in India since 2011 was looking to introduce transition to electric vehicles, right, from ICE and conventional vehicles. And so you have the, I mean, I might kind of skip some steps, but we have the National Electric Mobility Mission Plan introduced in 2013, right after which we have our first, if you will, FAME scheme, the first phase of the FAME scheme, which was then in 2015, which was followed up by the second one in 2019. Now, the first scheme, for example, did address two-wheelers, three-wheelers in terms of auto rickshaws. We had passenger vehicles, four-wheeler passenger vehicles, light commercial vehicles, and buses. Now, the interesting thing is, and this is actually acknowledged on by the government in their press statements as well, is that when they evaluated the first phase, they found that the benefits, and I'm going to quote here, that the benefits from unaccounted segments like electric three-wheelers and e-rickshaws can potentially add to results. However, growth in these segments was unplanned. So e-rickshaws, in a sense, was not even in the radar, right? But they recognized that this was a segment that was growing rapidly, and this needed to be addressed as well. You know, just to kind of give you again some points here. So in Delhi, currently we have about 74,500 registered. I think registered is a key word. Registered e-rickshaws grew by 50% from 2018. So on an annual basis, anywhere between 17,000 to 19,000 e-rickshaws are getting registered, right? And so I think that FAME 2 then also kind of pivoted to look at and focus on modes that would promote public transport on one hand, so therefore when they were talking about they were obviously prioritizing buses, but also thinking about improving access to public transport. But simultaneously, I think the goal was to also incentivize, right, the registration of new electric vehicles, especially e-rickshaws, if you will, and also kind of ensure some kind of standardization in terms of safety regulations through demand incentives. So I'll stop here, and then I'll also let Cedric come in.
No, that frames exactly my question. And for those who may not know, FAME stands for Faster Adoption of Manufacturing Electric Vehicles. There's a V there somewhere, but it's V. And so I turned to Cedric. Cedric, tell us about Three Wheels United and your entry into the space. And Sonal gave us the numbers, right? They're massive numbers. The potential market is huge, but you have a unique three-legged approach to electrifying three-wheelers. Tell us about it.
Well, I think Sonal has given us a good lesson about the entire industry. Let me talk about the three-wheelers. So when we look at it from a very simple point, we look at the vehicle, the driver, and everything else as one entity, right? The driver being the centerpiece here. You started by talking about, by identifying, and I think it's a case across board. People look at it as an India problem, or in Sri Lanka look at it as a Sri Lankan problem, but typically the people who operate these vehicles are around the same, I'd say, economic strata, usually not very educated, haven't had a bank account, depend entirely on an informal lending sector to lend to them. And because of that background, then what you see is that they're paying the highest interest rates, whereas they're the people offering really needed services for everybody every day, right? These are people we should be protecting. These are jobs we should be creating. And this is the segment we should work with to structure it or formalize it if we want to transition it into electric. So that's where Three Wheels comes from. Focus on the drivers, create them financial products that would facilitate their transition. And of course, there's the double benefit for it. The driver increases his income substantially. In our case, we've seen more than double their income, right? And then on the other front, you're reducing substantial amount of pollution, right? The problem is, as easy as it sounds, it is not the easiest thing to do because of the nature that it's just been, right? So what we do is we try and create integrated partnerships, like having people, well, we bring the manufacturers together. We are the financier, but we bring other financiers in place. We bring, say, the policymakers together, or the really operationalizing the policies on ground, right? We bring the charging station people together, and we build technology to facilitate that all of these people work together, right? I'll take a practical example of what we do. We have a manufacturer who builds the vehicle. The typical problems with that vehicle is that they don't know how much it's going to run for. They don't know when it's going to break down. So we ask that manufacturer to guarantee that. We don't care how you do it. Whenever that vehicle breaks down, provide another one, or replace this one, or whatever, right? There are multiple mechanisms in there, but then there is a guarantee. If you cannot do it, pay the driver, right? So we have an uptime warranty there. Then we have the charging side. We enable the drivers. Well, today, we know that in the future, what would scale would be battery swapping. But today, there's a lot of home charging, right? So we transition the driver from home charging to, say, battery swapping. So we ask them to, we check that they're parking these vehicles at places that can charge. If not, we make sure that it's provided, right? And then we talk about the registration part of that vehicle and actually operating it on road. So we help them get all of the documents that's required to do that. And then we talk about the financiers. So if you look at a lot of large banks, they don't want to do this. And the reason is multifold. One, the technology is new. Two, there is no secondary market. And three, this population is just not bankable. So we do all of behavior learning about this driver and make them bankable, right? Secondly, the newness of the technology that is covered by the manufacturer because we have that guarantees and warranties in place. And then third, we talk about the non-existence of a secondary market, right? A large bank doesn't want to end up having hundreds of vehicles sitting in the yard, right? And waiting.
Right, if they repossess them.
Exactly. So what Three Wheels has done is we've built a community of drivers. We have now close to about 30,000 offline, 20,000 online. And this community of drivers become our secondary market. So if in whatever scenario a driver X is defaulting, we can quickly move that vehicle to driver Y. So really, what we have done is build a platform that brings all of this together seamlessly. Notifications go when the vehicle is wrong and the contract is executed as per what we've agreed. If there's a charging point, we show it on an application, a simple mobile application to the driver where the closest charging point exists. And if it's free, if it's not free at that point, and then we manage all of the financing for large banks, right? That's what Three Wheels has done. We've done now, I think, more than 3,000 vehicles, and we're looking to do 10,000 this year and 100,000 next year. And that is just that's a drop in the ocean. But I believe that it is not a problem that we can solve by ourselves. Right. But once you prove the scalability of it, if you show drivers that they can make more money, right? And you show the rest of the world that it can actually work with these sort of partnerships, I believe there are more and more people who can adopt the model that we have or the technology that we have and scale this across the global south.
I love the wraparound that you've created, and it's very much a systems approach. And I won't mention kind of some countries, the Philippines, that have been funded with three-wheeler projects. I won't mention the bank, ADB, that bought these very expensive three-wheelers and imposed them on the tricycle drivers. There was no charging infrastructure. It was expensive. The drivers didn't know how to repair the electric motor. Right. And so I like the frame that Three Wheelers has put together, but it sounds like you're fighting a battle in so many fronts, right? And so you're trying to convince the banks that there's no risk. You're trying to convince the manufacturers to guarantee their product and to kind of give you fleet approach to it. And then I think the thing that is I would love to get your insights on is how about the drivers that you promised the benefits for them, but as Sonal said earlier, sometimes it's hard to convince them, or you yourself said, right, because it's of the way it was, to then say, okay, an electric vehicle, and I'm dealing with you as a company, and I'm not just borrowing it from someone I know in the neighborhood. How do you deal with that, and what are the benefits they actually get?
Well, that's a very, very interesting point. So I think, well, you start by saying we're fighting on a lot of fronts. I think a lot of the things are already proven. So we have partnerships which are on and running. The financing side, we have a financing house, so we do it ourselves. We tap into DFIs to fund DFIs and other investors to fund the company, and we on lend, right? So we deal with that. With the manufacturers, we already have I think almost 5 partnerships which are working, and it's there. And with the charging people, we have quite a few as well, and that's the reason Three Wheels is in the scale of phase it is in, right? That said, the drivers are core to our business, core to I think even the fundamental reason of why we exist, or even why personally I'm doing it, right? Three Wheels evolved. We've come a long way, right? We're not just a company set up yesterday. We evolved from being an NGO. We started by creating this community of drivers. We've worked closely with these drivers. We started by helping them get loans from banks, and then we understood the process and took it because we believe we could manage it better, right? So when we look at it, you say, how do you convince the drivers? I think it's very simple. Every driver wants a better life, right? The way of, and we live in a community, well, these are communities where a reference is all what it takes, right? A driver has to talk about his experience for another driver to adopt. And that's what we're going about. If you look at the work Three Wheels has been doing, we haven't gone on any massive campaign to shift everybody to Three Wheels, to electric, right? And that is because we believe that by showing one driver that the benefits actually exist, they will bring the next and the next, and before you know, the whole population is converted. And that's the approach we've just used. So if you talk to drivers today, who became part of our program 3 years ago, they have now owned their vehicles and their income has more than doubled, right? And that is a clear proof that it does exist and that it works. And these drivers then talk to other drivers and to other drivers, and that's how we scale up. Beyond that, like I mentioned, we have a community of almost 50,000 drivers. So while we have just shifted a few thousand to cleaner energies, we have a base of people who are going to replace their vehicles. If you look at India alone, India's replacing almost 500,000 vehicles, I think, on average over the last 10 years, right? Even if we just shift these vehicles to electric, or a fraction of them, then the problem would be close to getting resolved.
Right. I'm going to ask Sonal to, because she was nodding, to react a little bit to what Cedric was explaining, but also a question that I will throw at you both, right, is what happened during COVID and what's happening to electrification and the drivers? Because I love that the whole approach for Three Wheels United is about social trust, which is so much integral to the informal economy, informal sector, and informal transportation. So I like that. But Sonal, your reactions, and then jump into the question of tell us what happened with COVID, and then Cedric, tell us what happened to your drivers in your community during COVID, or is still happening.
No, I think I was just, I was listening to Cedric, and I think I just kind of really like the model, because at some point it'll be interesting to see how this compares with women e-rickshaw drivers that we know of and are also trying to adopt electric three-wheelers, and it'll be interesting to understand both the similarities and the differences as well. So very, very fascinating. I think in terms of, we recently got a grant from the High Volume Transport Applied Research Program, looking at the impact of COVID-19 on public transport, right? And while we initially started looking at women and their use of public transport, very quickly we realized that we could not only focus on buses, and we absolutely had to consider paratransit as well. But considering the dynamics of our research in December of 2020, which was right after Diwali in India, and we were on another spike, we also conducted surveys with 30 drivers. We had to be careful. These were face-to-face, etc.
Yeah.
So, and we looked at different types of paratransit operators, right? So not the auto rickshaw drivers, the electric rickshaw. We didn't look at cycle rickshaw at this point. Auto rickshaw, electric e-rickshaw drivers, the rural transport vehicles. These are four-wheelers, and then something. And then you have the motorized three-wheeler vehicles, which are called as fat savers. Okay, so I don't have another name for them, unfortunately.
Say the name again.
They call fat savers.
Okay.
So these were across different locations in Delhi, and I think we were really we saw that they had taken such a big hit due to COVID-19, and over a period of 6 months from May 2020 to December, at the time that we were conducting the surveys, 200,000 registered paratransit drivers lost about $233 million in incomes, right? And I think we've not heard these kinds of numbers, and I think it's important to highlight these loss of incomes. And I'll just very briefly kind of say some of the key aspects that we found, that while they were operating longer distances, so by 11%, so they ranged from 140 to 240 kilometers per day. Their passengers, e-rickshaws particularly took the biggest hit in terms of passengers, right? So they lost passengers by about 16%. And the e-rickshaws and auto rickshaws saw a drop from 30 to 60%. So that was the very, very, very large drop. And in order to compensate, they had increased their fares. They were not able to, maintain physical distancing and other norms. For example, many of them, while they said that it was important for them to follow safety norms, but they were not, primarily because of the costs. Even though they were nominal, I think at that point they were more concerned about having incomes, etc. So I think, and very briefly, so one of the big pieces that we saw was a big hit, and we felt that drivers had not, for example, been compensated sufficiently or supported in order to sail through this. Very happy to hear from what Cedric has observed as well.
What happened to your pool of drivers, Cedric, and the customers you're serving?
Well, I think, first of all, it's like the entire segment got hit, right? And then the dynamics change based on what type of driver, when the lockdown was on or off, etc., etc. But there was a complete lockdown, so everybody went to zero revenues, right? And that went on for a bit. But what we started doing, I think the general take is that there is impact. There is a substantial amount of impact in earning, in lifestyle. Some people have had to move cities. Some people have gone back to their natives, etc., etc. I think from us, what we saw, the hit was generally bigger in the tier 1 cities because people just stopped working. Nobody was going to offices. It's usually tech, employment driven, etc., and all of the other services supporting that. Than the tier 2s. Tier 2s and tier 3s are more smaller cities with manufacturing and less interaction, and more or less there was life going on in those cities. What we did, so as soon as that happened, it gave us an opportunity to be very creative, and we've been very busy during COVID. We started first an operation to give alternative revenues to our drivers. We partnered with a few NGOs to distribute food. We partnered with, not logistics, say people like the big baskets of India who deliver groceries when only groceries could be delivered, so that these drivers could help. And they had a shortage of people, so it was a win-win for everybody. So the drivers were making some money. For us as a company, well, we complied with the RBI's regulation not to recover money for some months from the drivers. So at least we were comfortable that they were making a little bit of money. We were not collecting money from them, right? And then as it went on, we started seeing a shift. Some drivers were just not able to handle it at that pace, etc. So we then roll out a program which was, if you have a commitment with us and you feel that you cannot ride the vehicle, you can voluntarily drop the vehicle, and we would get some other person who wants to ride to take up the vehicle so that it continuously produces revenue, so you don't go into bad debt. A lot of those vehicles we moved from tier 1 cities to tier 2 cities. It was a massive operation, but I think at the end of the day, we were very pleased because our portfolio dip was not that bad. We saw that drivers did not go a lot in the red, and this is just because we kept the vehicles on road, right? I think post December, a lot of that flipped. We went into build up mode rather than being conservative. We struck partnerships with aggregators to guarantee certain minimum income for these drivers, right? So we have a few now running both on our delivery vehicle end, because we also do light delivery vehicles as well as the passenger end. So a driver who's driving in a certain city is guaranteed a certain amount of money from a certain aggregator, right? So that for us was what we did. I think it also shaped how we should work as a company. So we completely went into, rather than just putting more vehicles on the road, we need to put vehicles on the road in partnerships that work, right? So that there's a complete loop. There is somebody who's needing a vehicle, there's someone who's driving a vehicle, and there's someone with the vehicle, right? So we double down on our partnerships, and our growth, our entire growth phase is based on some of those partnerships that we created or we reinforced during COVID. So I'll say all in all, drivers did get a hit, especially being the lowest income, I would say lowest income sector. So every hit really counts. But I think days are better than other people without any sort of support.
Right. So picking up on that, right, and in the context of the experience of COVID and the downturn and the hit that the drivers did, and the continuing program of FAME 2 and electrification, what are the pitfalls that government needs to address, apart from just giving incentives for the purchase of electric vehicles or infrastructure that needs to be built out, if it is going to continue apace, right, and recover? What would you add to either FAME 2 or sharpen? And a special question for you, Sonal, and in that context too, right, women and both them as users and drivers, what should we add? And I'm also very conscious that India is at 30% urbanization right now, and so it's climbing up that curve, and so the cities are gonna grow, and there's gonna be more mobility demand. What are the pitfalls government needs to address? And
let me take a shot at this. So I have to take a step back to say India is one of the forward-thinking governments. Right? They have done a lot in this space, more than most people. Right? So beyond FAME 2, there is tax cuts, there is no registration fees, all of those things. So and because of the things they're doing, they're allowing private players like us and others who are also very key stakeholders in there to come and own the space, right? There is a substantial amount of electric vehicles that are going on road now because of all of these efforts. Coming now to your question, what is it? I think a lot has already been done on the policy level. It's operationalizing the policy that needs to be done, right? When a city or a state decides or names out their policy, it usually takes about 1 to 2 years before the guy who actually has to register the vehicle knows about it. So a lot of it is around communication, is around telling people what really needs to happen, is around creating the processes to make it happen. And that is what I think needs to be done. Because a lot from a policy point, a lot has already been done to make sure that whether it's incentives or benefits goes directly to the driver. And that had been for the longest time the biggest problem. Now it's just about, let's all be clear around the processes and let's go and deploy as many vehicles as possible.
Right. So now, and just before you come in, so now, I'd just like to ask our guests to turn off their cameras, especially while you're making coffee, so that we can see our speakers. So now, tell me what you think you would advise the government, and then take us into the gender issues that particularly need to be addressed.
Yeah, no, I think I might probably use that as a lever to address some of the gaps as well, because I think that one of perhaps my concerns around current, I think, multiple state electric vehicle policies as well, is that they don't have a targeted approach towards increasing women's adoption of electric vehicles. And what does that mean? Our own work is also showing that there is, while we acknowledge that these are resource poor groups, this disadvantage is even more when it comes to women. And even though I think a similar model is being followed, for example, in Delhi, where we have the Self-Employed Women's Association. It's a membership-based organization that partnered with SMV, Green Solutions. So they also, began to encourage their members to, to become asset owners as well, which we know can make a big impact. And there are multiple challenges starting right from the licensing process, because you end up, they have to, I may have to change between rupees and dollars because it's not coming to me, but they have to pay a certain amount of money over and above your license fees in order to get both a learner's and a permanent license, right? This process is not smooth in a way. Including paying for police verification. The second piece is also that the upfront subsidy, for example, we have 30,000 rupees, divide by 75. I think we will get that. While there is an upfront subsidy, these subsidies are not sufficient to encourage enough women to come on board, and they need, in fact, higher subsidies so that they can get reduced loan amounts. And even though some of these organizations are more progressive than what we are seeing in the market, for example, they have an extended term for repayment of loans, 34 months compared to others, at least in Delhi, that we know of are giving about 18 months or so. You do find that you only have very few women actually taking up or becoming asset owners. And I do think that we need targeted policy responses for women recognizing their relative disadvantage. So I think this would be my recommendation for all state governments, including national, that we have targeted responses to encourage electric vehicle adoption amongst women. There is more, but I think there are some longer term recommendations, but those are, but I'd also be curious to hear about what Cedric would have to say as well.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with you, right? We tried a program. We tried a program of about 20 women. We paid for their training, driving training, issuing a license, all of that. And I'm just specifically talking about Bangalore here, just from training, which training takes lesser than 3-4 weeks, to getting that license takes about a year. By a year's time, if the person is not earning an income, they have to look for something else to do. So I do completely agree with you. And I just want to put this out as a call that if there are people working with groups of women, it's something that we would really like to do. We would give, we've created specific targeted programs towards women, right? And so if anybody's out there with a group of people who would like to help, and they should reach out.
Yeah, sure. I think, Benji, I might add one more thing. One of the things that we're realizing also in the context of Delhi is that thinking about the subsidy that comes to the driver to actually go to the financier. Because this, one of the biggest challenges that we are seeing in the case of Delhi is is non-performing assets, so close to 50% are in a sense, these are fairly high, and so they're actually thinking about how to reform the policy. There are many, but one of the key pieces was thinking about how a subsidy could go to the finance institution rather than so that it could go towards the payment of the vehicle as well.
Right. Oh, well, fine. Well, one question before I jump to global, right? And it's like, what's happening with quotas? Because I know a number of states and cities control the auto rickshaws by giving a kind of computed limit to the number of licenses, not driven by demand, but simply kind of this math of X population, X auto rickshaws per population. So we only have 45,000 licenses. Is that still operating, or have they removed that and allowed the sector to be more responsive?
That is still operating for the non-electric. For the electric vehicles, in most places there isn't a quota there, and I think that is one of the great advantages to help people make that shift, right? Yeah.
That's fantastic. Okay, so let's wrap it up with a question now. Go ahead, Sona.
Yeah, I think the only concern is that while there's no quota, it's really weird because the traffic police will then, while there's no cap on the permits, they will restrict them on plying on major roads. You know, so there's like you allow them, but then you restrict them from operating. I think that's the sad part. But, yeah.
Well, I remember when I started getting involved in informal transportation, it was Delhi. And at that time, this was about 2010, 2011. If you were a cycle rickshaw driver, you needed to get a permit from a veterinarian. And it was weird because it came from animal carts. And they had rules like you could not cross a bridge, so you were not technically a vehicle. So I think there's a lot of progress. So let's take it global and say, what can the world learn from India's electrification, and what do the large agencies, the multilateral banks, the big funders like TUMI, right, and like ADB need to pay attention to in terms of electrifying and making our transportation systems more climate resistant? I will bang the gong and say, well, they need to pay attention to informal transportation because it's not in any of their papers. But what else? What else can we do? I know there's a group of people in the World Bank that are very passionate about informal transportation and have been for a while, but I haven't seen a World Bank facility that is particularly about paratransit or intermediate public transit or three-wheelers. What should the world be paying attention to, and what's the advice that India has to give? Apart from scaling Three Wheels United, I would say.
Well, okay, let me take this. So I have conversations with a whole bunch of people almost every day on this subject. First, you touched about the World Bank. The World Bank, I'm part of, and Three Wheels is part of a working group where they're thinking around either creating subventions or large guarantees to guarantee financiers to go in. Right. I think the Asian Development Bank, which is one of our investors as well, they've created a ventures arm to deploy capital in the space, early stage equity capital plus debt. If you ask me globally, I think the problem in a lot of these markets is debt is drying up. And particularly when it ends up more expensive for this type of clients, then there is no reason to shift, right? So what they should be looking at is models, innovative models as ours that can help them deploy this capital, right? And what you need around those, there are multifolds of what you can do around it. Is one part of it could just be providing cheap debt. Another part of it could be providing guarantee type instruments for these sort of sectors. And there is a lot more, right? They could do equity in some cases to bring out, and there is they could run test projects with credible partners to already establish that it could work in certain places. Right. Because I think at the end of the day, it comes to the unit economics. The driver is going to have to pay for this, right? In some way or form, the driver is the end person who is paying for it. Now, it just matters how it gets to that driver and how it gets back up to whoever is facilitating this. So I think that is that is what I would say. And then there is a lot of successful models, right? What Three Wheels is doing, for example, is successful in a small scale, right? Getting that to a larger scale and replicating to other countries or regions is what large organizations are good at, right? So the focus should be there. The focus should be identify what is successful and replicate it, right? And then you can move everybody to that space.
Fantastic. So now?
Yeah, I think I'd just build on that, maybe thinking about increasing adoption through, if you will, collectives, and that can be broader, that can then provide multiple things, not only financial, but also other support, everything from helping them through the process of licenses, getting loans, providing support in terms of emergencies, for example, and also advocating on their behalf, right? I think that could be one way to think about implementation. That would be my one pick. And the second thing is thinking about skill development, right? I don't know if this is being given adequate attention. Everything from vehicle maintenance to thinking about how do you, for example, understanding your vehicle, the battery, etc. I think there is not enough attention being paid to that. I know that the Delhi government is looking at thinking about a skills university, but just thinking about skills as an essential component of transition as well.
Right. I would add that, thinking about city policies that in terms of also of built environment that accommodates our three-wheelers and four-wheelers and the behaviors of informal transportation, and funding transportation differently is the other thing. All right, I'm going to wrap us up there and turn it over to Rohan, who will then open us up to questions to the audience. And Rohan. Oh, muted.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Benjamin and Cedric and Sonal, for very interesting discussion. Myself, I was so much into discussion, and I didn't want it to. Well, I didn't want it that it ends so quickly, but
we can keep going.
I'd like to take this opportunity also to give an opportunity for some questions from our audiences. And we have one or two questions into the chat, and I'll just take it up. And in the meantime, I'll also encourage other participants to please post your questions into the chat. So the first question, it is from Shelja Goyal, and it is to Cedric. So Shelja says she's a mobility professional in the rail industry, and she's based in Bangalore. And the vision of TWU, Three Wheels United, really intrigues her. So how could she possibly join the mission which you are leading, Cedric? And not just for Shelja, maybe how could other people from other cities which you are probably working, how could they join you into this mission?
Well, so it depends on, I'll just give a global answer, right? For everybody who's listening to the question, it depends on the field of expertise. We're growing, we need people, we need more capital to do this, we need more minds to do this, right? Connect with us, reach out to us through our websites, and let's have a chat, or connect with me personally on LinkedIn, and we can take it up from there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Cedric. So could you also please let us know in which cities you are already operating in India and internationally as well, and which are the cities you are planning to steer your operation into the coming months and years?
Yeah, so in India we have a global focus across the whole country. We've started in Bangalore. So what we do is a hub and spoke model. We go with the tier 1 city and we do the tier 2s around it. So we've done Bangalore and 5 cities around Bangalore, 5 tier 2 cities. We have just started Delhi, and we're going to do some tier 2 cities around it. And then we're looking at Hyderabad and Kerala next. But yeah, in the next coming years, we're looking to be largely across the metropolitan cities in India. Beyond India, we are currently exploring pilots in East Africa as well as in the Philippines.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Cedric. So more questions are coming in. So the second question is about what are your opinions about integration of three-wheeler service as first and last mile mobility for MRT modes? How would a financing scheme look like? Example, fare integration.
Well, I think the fare is defined by the states, right? so there's little that we can do around it. Yeah, go ahead, Benji, please.
No, I have both a response and a reaction. The reaction being in paratransit, informal transit is always dreamed of by the formal transportations. Oh, they'll be last mile, right? And so we'll build our light rail or our BRT, and they'll be last mile. But for most of the users, and this is true, we've known it, that a single seat ride is just way more important. Yeah. And so the lines we build of formal transit may not go to where we want it to go, and it may take us out of our way and break us up. So I think yes, but not only should it be person last mile. And as Sonal said, right, it's in many cities, it is public transportation. As to fare integration, Jakarta is doing something interesting with its angkots, where you have a single card that you can use on the Transjakarta and on the rail, and then also use on the angkot. But that requires a shift in the business model. The current business models are all your only income is from the fare. And that's built on, to me, a lie that public transportation can pay for itself, because nowhere does it pay for itself. The places in the world where public transportation is in the black and earns money, it's because the government puts money into it, or they have value capture mechanisms. So Hong Kong's MTR earns $1 billion a year because they're a real estate developer. And so we need to flip those and have value capture, and have, taking from the BRT model, service contracts with the informal transportation providers. So they serve on a per kilometer basis, and then the fares are centrally collected. It's also a way to support the people who use informal transportation, to subsidize them, because they pay more for mobility than people who own cars. So that's more of an editorial comment there.
No, I completely, especially on that last part, I join you there, Benji, because that is pretty much what we've started doing with even the ride-hailing companies that operate in the space. We're basically saying, hey, you have to guarantee some income for this guy when he works for you for a day, right? The fluctuations in pricing should not be his problem. We're way bigger. We can address this problem better than that guy, and that's the only way you provide seamless integration of transportation. And whether it's say an Uber guaranteeing that, or a government, or a third party, somebody's got to do it. And because at the end of the day, yeah, like you mentioned, it's not going to pay for itself.
Thank you, Benji. Thank you, Cedric. So the next question is from Ms. Gaurav Mittal, and he says that he understands there's a difference between electric rickshaw and electrification of an auto rickshaw. And in India, the focus is more on electric rickshaw rather than electric auto at the moment. But the life expectancy of auto rickshaws are much better as compared to electric rickshaw. So what's your views on it? Means how, if I understand Gaurav right, he intends to ask what should be the way forward? Are we going on the right path? and what should be the phenomena? Either it should be electric rickshaw or auto rickshaw in the coming years.
Quickly on that answer, and then maybe Sona can add as well. Sona gave a whole long conversation about the industry. I believe, well, first of all, I tend to disagree. So for the past few years, e-rickshaws have been the only thing that existed. Now you have large players, but also small players, the likes of Mahindra and Piaggio, who are in the electric rickshaw spaces. That's one. Secondly, a lot of, when you come down south, a lot of states don't even allow e-rickshaws to ply, right? So you can only deploy the electric rickshaws. And a large part of our fleet have been electric rickshaws. So if you look at it, and I do, then on the second part, I do agree that these vehicles have a longer life. They mimic the behaviors of a traditional non-electric vehicles, so how much speed they can cover on a single charge, they can go longer, etc., etc. So you do have a lot of large manufacturers coming into that have come into the space and launched products, because it's now been almost 3 years when the first products of Mahindra were launched. And you have smaller players who are also coming into the space. And when you look at it, it is easier to even to sell that product to drivers, because it is comparably almost equal to what they're familiar with, than a driver completely shifting to e-rickshaws. But that said, there is a lot of, I think the question is coming from a point, I've not seen a lot of these vehicles on road, and that is completely true. So there is a lot of work to be done there between ourselves as part of the ecosystem, as well as the manufacturers.
I think I'll build on this and also maybe take up the next question. I just want to take a step back and say that we should not look at electrification as only a technology upgradation, if you will, but also take this as an opportunity to see how we can reform the sector as well. I think, because I feel like maybe we are focusing a lot only on the electrification aspect. And to kind of give you an example, that many of, we have different types of services, right? We have point-to-point services, and most, paratransit services are actually shared, right? And, but the only kind of permits that you have, and which are the monopoly, if you will, of the city transport undertakings, are stage carriage permits. So only they get those, whereas your shared auto rickshaws, for example, don't get those. You only get a contract carriage permit. And that kind of leaves them in a very ambiguous kind of state, and also vulnerable, if you will, to both, in a sense, there's soft enforcement, if you will, so they are allowed to operate. So I think that we should also see this as an opportunity to organize the sector and to address other reforms that might also benefit passengers. So just want to kind of put that as one more layer when we're talking about challenges as well for the sector.
Yeah. Let me just echo that I think builds on the whole. If we're going to make the whole sector sustainable in 3 dimensions, not just climate change, but also equity, right, and the financial sustainability, then we can't just be thinking about the vehicle, because, and that's so much of it. The focus is, it's a 2-part layer, right? Large organizations or global organizations are focused on electric cars, or electric buses, and we say there's 3-wheelers and 4-wheelers and 2-wheelers. And also that it's not just the vehicle, and we take this opportunity, exactly as you're saying, Sonal, to transform every part of it, including the way we think about how we manage them, right? Yeah. How we manage the system.
Great.
And if I may I want to come to this whole business about restricting the movement of it's, I think it kind of builds on what Benji spoke about infrastructure, because, you want to encourage them, right? You want to encourage electric rickshaws, but you also restrict them on 236 roads, for example, in the city of Delhi, many of which have your metro stations. Right. So then how is it that you're going to access your passengers? Right. And I think that this is a second kind of biggest challenge as well, that if you're only going to look at paratransit, for example, in terms of especially electric rickshaws, in terms of speeds but not occupancy, then how is it that you're going to prioritize, these modes as well, even in terms of if you're thinking about them as first and last mile, even if.
Thank you very much, speakers, for echoing your thoughts on this question. And I noticed that we have already exhausted the scheduled time, but if I may have your permission, speakers, then we'll be willing to take one or two more questions, maybe maximum for 5 more minutes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So our next question is from Matteo Carvajal, and the question is for Cedric. How do the payments from the drivers work? A monthly payment and a payment for swappable batteries. And then how do you ensure the payments? What challenges have you faced?
Well, this is a question I could talk about for the next 3 days, but I have to, unfortunately, I have to limit it to a minute. This is the core of Railways United, right? Once we started, we understood that banks don't work well with drivers because they're trying to treat drivers as monthly income earners, whereas drivers are daily income earners. So they haven't built systems to do that. When they try to do it, it becomes too costly for them. Right? We worked with Microsoft Research over 4 years, and we're still working with them today to create a platform that would really understand a driver's behavior, and then tailor solutions towards that particular driver, or tailor how we interact with that particular driver. Right? Simple things like learning. Well, that came from a big failure. We thought we could just replicate M-Pesa from Kenya and have it work, but it's never the case when you don't have the infrastructure, when the adoption of technology is at different levels, and when the adoption of the solution is at different levels, right? So you have to then go in depth to understand what each client needs, but keeping in mind that you have to be collecting your money on a daily or on a weekly basis at most, because these drivers don't come from a background that are going to save. They have very unstable financial health. So anything could happen and your money is not priority, right? So we've plugged into all of the collection mechanisms, the online collection mechanisms that exist in India, but you have to still admit that 80–90% of the transactions here are still in cash. So you have to understand the driver who needs you to go to his home every day versus the driver who needs you to come once a week. You need to understand the motivation why he would pay. You need to coach him on why he needs to pay in time. And that is all what this solution is doing. We don't do it in person. Otherwise, you would require 200 people to do that for say, 500 drivers. We have one person doing this for 150 drivers. When we started our in-person, without technology, we had the maximum a person could do was 30. So we've built a lot around this. We have the solution that works. Of course, in other markets, you need to tweak it. You need to understand the behavior of the clients in there. But that is the core of what Railways does.
Thank you very much, Cedric. Maybe I'll just follow up on this question and would like to understand from you as to, do you only serve individual owners or the community which you have developed, or do you also work together with aggregators? Because we see many aggregators coming up in for the last mile connectivity solutions, first and last mile connectivity solutions in India. So
yes,
could you?
well, we've built. Thanks for that question. The quick answer is we recently started working with aggregators, but that's because we've spent the last 4 or 5 years trying to understand the individual driver, right? So while we work with aggregators, our focus still remains on the driver. So we have to maintain touch with the driver, because what you typically see is you have an aggregator comes on top, creates, in the worst case scenario I'm talking, and it doesn't happen all of the time, is the reason why financiers don't do aggregators is because an aggregator comes on top, creates a smoke screen that everything is working well, and then after 2 or 3 years or the last year of your portfolio, he dumps it to you with everything being bad, right? So what we do is we go beyond that aggregator and also connect with the driver. So they use our tools and our tools that we've created to work with the driver, and that is the way we then work with the aggregator. But we're doing it now.
Thank you, Cedric. Yeah, Sonal.
No.
All right.
I was just going to say, and we have to leave soon. I'm very sorry.
All right. So
Yeah.
maybe we can wrap up with the session. There are 1 or 2 questions which are still yet to be answered, but I would like to share with the audience that we will take these questions up, we will answer it, and we'll get back to you over emails. And I would like to thank all the speakers for this very interesting discussion today. And yes, to all the audience, that we will be we have already recorded this session, and we will be sharing this session on our website, and we will also mail the Q&As and the pending questions over the email to all of you. Thank you very much for joining today, and see you next time in the next session then.
Thank you, everyone.
So much.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks
Cedric
for
and
having me.
Sonal.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Jumi.